Please welcome Ben Stern and Charlene Stern. I told Charlene earlier this morning that when I first saw the film, I was just weeping, and I just didn't know how I'd compose myself after seeing it again. So thank you so much for this project. We're so grateful for it.
Can you wear that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
Oh.
I have lots of things to clip things on.
Thank
Ben,
you.
is that better? Good.
Yeah.
Good.
Thank you.
Oh, good. I'm glad. Ben, my son is 17 years old, and I look at him, and he's so fresh, and there's a way in which he's like a child, and a way he's like an adult, and I think that's the age you were when the Nazis came into Poland. And I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about what your childhood was like before they arrived. So what was it like being a kid before this terrible thing happened?
Well, at that time, we moved from Warsaw to a smaller town, about 20 kilometers from Warsaw. We took over the business from my uncle. He went to Palestine, and the grandmother remained in the business, so we took over the business. I was, after 14, 15, 16 years old of Jewish education in public school, I became a part of the workforce in the business. It was normal for a small community, Jewish community, surrounded with Poles and farmers and peasants. We dealt with them and what's going on. 1935, the Nazi Polish organization, not the Nazis, but they picked up from the Nazis, from German education, from Goebbels' treacherous propaganda, and it poured over into the streets of Poland, and they marched in front of the store, "Don't buy by Jews." That was the beginning. Obviously, the little we could help, the Polish government was not very friendly with the Jews. It was near, we led our life the best we could as Jews.
When did the Germans invade, and were you surprised by that, and what were the first days like of the occupation?
I'll tell you that the propaganda, my grandmother got a concession for selling alcohol from the German government in World War I. She gave up her apartment and made a little hospital on the way from the Russian front. So for that, they gave her a concession for alcohol, and the Polish government recognized that concession up to the 1939, and my grandmother said, it cannot be, the Germans cannot be so bad. She knew the experience from World War I.
Yes.
However, a few days before, I buried the alcohol in the shed in the yard. We knew that everybody will want the alcohol. And on the first Friday, 1939, September 1st, 1939, a motorcycle, a three-wheeler, 3 German soldiers pulled up and showed to drink. I knew Yiddish language, very similar. So I gave him 3 bottles, and the first bottle they opened up, I had to take a sip to make sure it's not poisoned. And then they gave me 3 coins, 30 pfennig, and then they said thank you and pulled away. So that was a good sign.
Right, right.
And Sunday, one of the Nazis and a civilian German who lived in Poland prior to the war put on a swastika and came to to our apartment, to my mother, to give him the alcohol. He took her in the yard. She said, "We don't have it. The Polish soldiers were sold out." He took out the gun and was going to shoot her. He was standing in the window. I was less than 18 years old then, and I watched with the gun is at mother's head. I was at the second floor looking down the yard. He didn't shoot her.
Yeah, yeah.
That was the first contact of. So from there on, they pulled me to work and mistreatment. Not only work, but during the work we were beaten and screaming and kicking. So that was the beginning of the show.
Right, right, exactly. Exactly. The film does so much to describe what it was like when you were in that small apartment with everyone so close.
Okay. Very, yes.
No, that's good. I want to hear whatever he says. But
Okay.
I want to respond to that. From the little apartment, they threw us out from the apartment that my grandmother had, and we got one little apartment, one room. And over there we were only grandmother, my parents, we were five. And that was beginning 1940. End of 1940, that little community of Jews were forced to the Warsaw Ghetto.
So I just want to add something.
yeah.
Between then, my grandparents and my great-grandmother begged my father to save himself, to leave, to go. And he didn't want to leave his family. And they cried and cried until he agreed to go. So without being away from home, he smuggled himself past the Polish line, the German line, and the Russian line into Russia for about 4 months and worked jobs and whatever, but he was safe. A young friend from his hometown came in, and my father said, "How is my family? How is my mother?" And his friend said, "They've thrown him out of the apartment and taken the business, and your mother is sick." He smuggled himself back. And the lines, they sold, everything was harder, 3 borders.
Yeah.
I want to add to it, that was not an easy smuggling back. The Polish hooligans were roaming the trains, and they recognized a Jew, they pulled him off, sold him for a bottle of alcohol or a kilo of sugar. They were rewarded for bringing in Jews.
Right, right, exactly. Everywhere you went wasn't safe, and you wouldn't know anyone there. You wouldn't know the language, you wouldn't know people, you wouldn't have friends to help you.
Once we were in the Warsaw Ghetto, they built a brick wall around it, and before the war, Warsaw had 350,000 Jews. And in 1940, beginning 41, it grew to 500,000. Wow. They brought in all the small communities into the ghetto, and there was. That's where we got the 6 family members in one room. The film tells it that no heating, no food. We got the ration, public kitchen. They handed out a cart, food cart, and you had to punch it for the little water soup as it was, and our ration bread was packed with sawdust and potato peeling. it was no bread in it. So that
Yeah. It seemed like everybody's in such close quarters, and then in the film too, just you recognize just how much you missed those people that you were living so closely with when they were taken away from you.
the movement was, we were curtailed, we were packed.
Right, right.
Smaller ghetto for 500,000 people. The disease started spreading. No food. People were standing on the sidewalk with a cop, or a mother put a little kid on the sidewalk and she stayed 8-10 feet away. The child was crying, and all of a sudden it stopped crying and it passed away. And the rule was that when you have a dead body in the room, the courtyard, you have to take him out on the sidewalk, and a wagon came by, pulled by humans,
Yeah.
and they threw the body on the wagon, and a mass grave was, the cemetery were full of mass graves. Yes.
You, your tattoo, the triangle tattoo, in the film you mention it's for especially dangerous people. Could you explain that a little bit more? I was wondering what it was that made you especially dangerous. Was it because you were from Warsaw, or what else? What was it?
Well, right
you
then
hear
and
it?
there, in 1942, August 15th, 1942, we were, my mother, my younger brother, and I remained in this apartment. Then we finally decided to go in the march because we had no means of livelihood, no
Right,
food.
right.
They pushed mother and my brother to the right side, and I was, I wound up in 1942 in Majdanek.
Okay.
Yes,
I just want to answer your question.
Yeah.
So he, after 9-10 months, volunteered to go to Auschwitz, and it turned out
not knowing where I'm going.
Right, of course. How
a
would
young
anybody
man.
know?
He
Exactly.
wanted to find his family. They were all.
Yeah.
He did not know.
Yeah, he figured
what
you're not
happened
here,
to
and
the
you
family.
could go anywhere. They'd have more of a chance of seeing them there than you
Right.
would there.
And so it turned out he was put in transport in a cattle car that held the captured fighters from the Warsaw Ghetto uprising.
Right.
So he arrived with them. They were all tattooed with the green triangle that meant extra dangerous Jews from
Right,
the Warsaw Ghetto. And they were restricted from going out too far on work detail. There were restrictions because the Nazis were worried about
Right,
them.
exactly.
Yeah.
You know, when you undertook this project, I mean, I think it's such a brave thing that for Ben to like go back and tell these stories. It must have been very hard to rethink these memories and tell the stories. But I wonder what it was like for you, Charlene. What did you learn that you didn't know already about your parents' life and this episode?
Wow. So it took me 7 years to make the film. And I'd done a lot of other things in my life and worked with creative groups to do wonderful projects, but it was my first film. And so I pulled together an award-winning team. And at the same time, being producer and director, I was also the student.
Yeah.
We had, what was it like? First of all, I've done a lot of things in my life. This is the project I was sent here to do. And to be my parents' daughter. And so its heart and soul went into this. And the first cut was 110 minutes.
Well, I can imagine. It would be hard to keep it short. The
greatest pain was to bring it down to 28 minutes.
Yeah.
And fortunately, Vivian Kleinman, who is here, my creative producer, assured me 20 years ago, when you cut film, it was lost, it was on the floor. Today, we have all the outtakes, and hopefully there'll be a way to put them on the website to add them to the future.
Right.
They are not lost. But it was the hardest thing, because there were moments I wanted in this film. But the most important thing that I learned is that the film has to tell a good story. And I made this film for young people everywhere. I wanted to cross the intersection between my father's generation and young people starting out their adult lives today. I wanted to cross from history into today. 7 years ago, I had no thought how relevant and critical my father's message would again be to people everywhere. My father is 95, fiercely Jewish. I want this to go out to everyone.
Right. Well, it's such an example to all of us to see the strength of character. And I mean, I wonder, Ben, too, I thought a lot about your faith, in that section where you talk about meeting God and asking about the innocence and the children that had been lost. And I wondered, that's one part of it, but how did your faith help you in getting through all this? I mean, at every stage there was, like you on the walk, the march, where there's 7,000 people and only 150 survive. I mean, how did your faith help you to survive and make it through all this?
I didn't make peace.
Yeah.
I didn't. I want you to know that I still dream about. I still see my family, friends at night marching in different stages, different places. I live with it. But I must say that I survived for the purpose to remember, to share with as many people as possible the evil thing that hatred and hatred of religion, of color, skin, of whatever it is. At that time, in 1938, was Kristallnacht. In 1978 was Skokie threat.
Right.
And now we're still learning and hearing from the higher up encouraging violence or hatred, which it tears me apart to know that I lived to hear this great United States, that when I arrived and saw the Statue of Liberty, I started to grasp what freedom is like.
Right.
And that's why I got the encouragement to build a new family, because my wife and I, we discussed very little if we want to recreate a family. We couldn't stay in Germany. We arrived here as refugees. And unfortunate and not fortunate, some people, very few people were nice to us and then gave some support. But I started working and nobody gave me much after. But it reached 1978, the Nazism, which I could not permit.
Right,
in my
right.
mind. I did not survive to relive the same tragedy and permit and not react. And we protected our 3 children as much as possible. She didn't learn about our background till about she was 14 years old. And she adopted a neighbor, a woman from Czechoslovakia, as a grandmother. she came home from school and she said, everybody got uncles, grandmothers, where's mine?
Right, right.
How do we respond, cover this up?
Right.
That was an ordeal that religiously I could not make peace with it.
Right. Well, and that's part of the story that I think is so extraordinary too. Is just being such, writing the article in the Chicago Tribune, and being someone who just stands up and says no.
If you can imagine, well, in 1968, out of Northwestern University in Evanston, next to Skokie, was published the first Holocaust denial book by Professor Butts. Now, I was already in California, so I didn't know what he did, but he called me after and he said, I called the university, I asked to have an opportunity to lecture the history professors, and Shar, you would have been proud, no one fell asleep. That was the beginning, the shock of it.
Yeah.
The denial of it. And then in 78.
I wish you'd explain that to me. I just don't understand how, what is the history of this? I mean, Americans calling themselves Nazis and marching and writing these books. I mean, what is the psychology of that? Where does that come from?
The slogans of the Nazis and the flyers, they're going to send us back to the crematorium.
Yeah.
So there were threats. There were threats all along.
But that's not a question, freedom of speech. When being threatened with your life, you cannot say that. And you cannot call a fire in a movie house. It's not legal. It's not proper. It went to the court, to the state Supreme Court, and we had a president of the ACLU, American Civil Liberty Union, defending the Nazis against me, us.
Okay, wait. So I just want to say that for those of you who go to the website Near Normal Man, Ira Glazer, who fought my father in 1978, wrote a film review of this film. It's astounding. It's astounding. He and I have had many conversations.
Wow.
I told him I grew up far more afraid of hate speech unchecked than the freedom of speech, because hate speech can slide into hatred, violence, rage.
Right.
Nazism.
Yeah.
A form of Nazism.
You mentioned the election. I mean, I wonder, I don't know if you've had enough time to get much feedback about the film, but I wonder if people who are immigrants or refugees now or Muslims are seeing this film and recognizing their own story in it.
I screened the film, the rough cut, with young people of very different backgrounds.
Yeah.
East Oakland, Laney, Merritt College, Minnesota, and there was one young woman, and I paid them $25 to watch the rough cut and answer 8 questions.
Yeah, great.
And this one young woman, a Latina, watched the film, and she said, I'm not taking your money. I said, what do you mean? You can use the money. This was at Laney College.
Right.
She said, I'm not taking your money. I'm a graduate of the California foster care system, and your father has taught me I can now go forward and have a life.
Wow. Yeah.
She said, you promised me you'll bring it back
Yeah.
to foster care parents and teenagers. And I kept getting these reactions,
Yeah.
and we knew then we were going in the right direction.
You are. That's such a
Yeah.
powerful testimony. And that's, even people who haven't, Ben, you're such an example to all people to be able to survive and to be able to have heart and to be able to have the courage to say no, when you see these things happening again. It's.
I get encouraged when I can speak it out, share it. There's no way I can share it in details because you would sit 24 hours and still not did it. But I'm speaking especially today, at this time of what we're in, on behalf of the refugees.
Yeah.
We got to accept them and show them human side of us.
Yeah.
That we have feelings for them, that they're suffering. And this is so important encouragement.
It is. I'm sorry, go ahead, Charlene.
You know, you asked about his faith.
Yes.
In Auschwitz, my father could no longer pray.
Yeah, I can imagine.
There was a man, a prisoner, who smuggled a little prayer book in. And he asked my father if he would guard him outside a potato storage shed while he prayed. And my father would stand guard, and there was a signal if an SS man or capo came near.
Yeah.
In
1945, my father was walking in a DP camp with my mother.
With Mom?
Yeah. And all of a sudden, this man comes running up, screaming and crying, and throws himself at my father.
Wow.
And says, "I'm the one you guarded. You saved my life."
Yeah.
You know, there's so many stories. There's so
Well,
many
that's what I
in
think-
this one man.
Yeah.
So
I
many.
even think Helen, your all of her stories, and how hard that must have been to include or not include them, or what was it like when you first met Helen?
Before I respond,
Okay, yeah.
I want to remind, when I worked in the coal mines, we built outside a barrack, and every day I worked on mixing the mortar. Every day lunchtime, a lady passed by and dropped a sandwich.
What year?
Pardon?
What year?
1944. If she dropped a sandwich and kept walking, I realized that it meant something. I picked it up and shared with the other fella that
Yeah.
I am happy to tell that fact, that little gesture of a sandwich, that 74 years later, I am expressing thank you. I never had a chance to tell her thank you.
Right. So imagine that, something that we might do right now.
The good deed,
Yes.
it goes down in history.
It does.
In expressing how it was. I've been searching Germany looking for my family.
Right.
I didn't know that they're all dead.
Yeah.
So I've been going from one big city to the other. There were committees with lists and books of names.
Right.
But who looks for whom, who survived, who's looking for what. Very little has been paired up. I wound up at Bergen-Belsen English zone. Germany was divided in 3 zones, and I wound up in Bergen-Belsen with 2 other guys. We go to the dining room, and next is the office, and books and pages and whatever. We look, and the 2 guys, what I was with me, they found a girl that they attended school together in Poland in 1938.
Right.
Before a little city near Lodz, Brzezin. They took the name, went to the house, and there were 4 girls in that house, in that room. There were military quarters. I'm stretching it.
You're not going to have time.
It was, we start talking and asking, well, she's looking for family, I'm looking for family. And when she told me that she's from Warsaw, that was the closest
Right.
that I could hold on of the past.
Right.
I had nothing else. So we after 8 weeks, I married her. I took her back to the American zone.
Okay.
I married her, and tell you, I did not we didn't dream of coming to the United States.
Right.
That's the total honesty. We started preparing to go illegally to Palestine, but since we were married, they didn't want to take us. They didn't wanted single people. And Mrs. Roosevelt came to dedicate.
Okay. All right. You're going too long.
We have a tradition of taking questions from the group.
Okay.
So if you have, if Rebecca, if you have a question, then give
okay.
Rebecca the card, and she will. Charlene, one of the things that Rebecca told me about in preparing me for today was that your father has a new chapter in his life in living with a roommate. Maybe you could tell me a little bit about the roommate, how this whole thing came about, and you know, it just seems like another interesting chapter to your dad's
Okay.
There isn't, no, wait,
You
I'll do it,
want-
yeah. There isn't a day that I don't learn something from
I
my
wanna hear it.
parents. Okay.
I know, we should give you the
You'll
little
hear it.
patch right here.
No, it's okay. Okay, there isn't a day I don't learn something from my dad. My mother has advancing dementia, and came a time about 1.5 years ago, we had to take her to skilled nursing care. We could not continue to care for her. And my father, we were so heartbroken, and I was afraid that I was going to lose both parents. And so we started to look for, he said, I'm lonely, and he had a second bedroom in the apartment. And so we started to look for a roommate.
Naomi.
Yeah. So I would say we reached out locally to various people we knew. Naomi Seidman is a professor at GTU, and I wrote an ad, and she wrote a young woman student, graduate student there, saying, Leah, he's the handsomest, coolest old dude you'll ever want to meet.
She carries the same name as my grandmother.
Oh,
Leah.
that's great. Yeah.
So the first meeting they had, she told him that her grandparents were active, unrepentant Nazis. And he took a deep breath and said, and you? And she said, my father walked out of his parents' home at the age of 16 and never turned back. We were raised the opposite. Yeah. He said, I think we can do this. And so for 10 months, the last 10 months, they've lived together as roommates, and there's a lot in the press that you can see, and
we went to the graduation last week.
Last week.
And her parents came.
Right.
Oh,
we were happy to host them too, and she's moving on with her life in a very positive way. So, does that help?
Yes. What can we learn from you about forgiveness?
Oh.
I'm
Okay.
sorry, the questions aren't easy.
Did you hear that?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's not easy.
You can always take a pass, too.
You don't need that. You can talk.
It's easier to hate than to forgive. And yet, in 1945, when I was looking at the Statue of Liberty, and if I would not step forward and separate myself from the hatred, I would not go on and rebuild a family, go on with my life. We were very despondent. In the beginning, my wife and I, we were very, very disappointed. But strange, you could talk with no one and that. And our memory was so vivid. When we were sitting in the living room by the end, and the aunt was in the kitchen. My wife bursted out crying. She thought she heard her mother, and with it, I started crying.
Okay, so you asked about forgiveness.
Yeah.
Leaving hatred behind was my father's step. I would have understood if I inherited a father who was angry, depressed, withdrawn, bitter. As I learned what they went through and thought about how could such evil exist in this world, the more astounding situation in my life was, how did I get the opposite? I got a father filled with love for the world, hope, kindness.
Okay.
And that's what I set out to put in the film.
Yeah, and that comes across so powerfully. You're right. I mean, I had a friend his father was interned in a Japanese prison camp, or Japanese internment camp in Manzanar, and he was broken, and he never was quite the same. And everyone knew what had happened. But Ben,
Not everyone.
yeah, Ben, you're a different sort. Yeah, not everyone is like you. Yeah. Has the ACLU, this is one of our questions, has the ACLU recognized hate speech as opposed to free speech and other legal civil rights groups?
They struggle. There is protection against threatening speech. The Illinois Supreme Court decided the Nazis had a right to march. It is only because my father decided to send out petitions and got 750,000 signatures from around the country, urging the courts to not allow the Nazis to march. But it's because of his fight with other survivors that 60,000 Christians and Jews decided they were going to come and counter-demonstrate. And it was that stopped the Nazis. Now, Ira Glazer and I have had good conversations, and he says, you know, freedom of speech is great when it's your ideas that have the freedom to be said. But he would never lecture survivors. He would never dream of telling them that it was wrong to oppose. He said, my father's remedy was perfect.
Yeah, the
Freedom
law
of
was upheld
speech against
Yeah.
freedom of speech counter-demonstration.
Exactly. And motivating people of goodwill. As you say, the miracle is that there are people of goodwill in this world where there seems like every evidence not to. So here's another question. If you could have people take away one lesson from this, what would it be from today and the talk?
One lesson.
One lesson from our conversation this morning and from the film.
You must be hopeful. You cannot afford to let down God in life and become a bystander when you see somebody hurting you, or somebody hurts your neighbor or your friend. You cannot stand idle when the walls are falling down. If it's an earthquake, we move forward to save people, to help people, but not to walk away from it and nothing happened. It's a sin to be indifferent.
How about you, Charlene? What is your take? I mean, that's wonderful. Be hopeful is a great. What about you? What is your take? What should our takeaway be from this?
My father's only tools to survive was his insistence upon living and remaining human. I asked him maybe a year ago, Dad, did you ever take advantage of something to help yourself survive at the expense of someone else?
Right.
Someone else's chance.
Right. Did you not share the sandwich ever?
And he said, I never would do that. He
Yeah.
wasn't raised that way.
Yeah.
And so that's the thing. How do we hear the voices? There's plenty of people who disagree with us. How do we hear what they have to say? And how do we figure out a way with our humanity to reach for justice in this world? The other thing is, in 1935 to 1940, even America would not oppose Hitler, 42, up to
Right. Oh,
42.
yeah.
The greatest chance for all our survival is to learn to be for ourselves and for others. That's what I take away.
Yeah. Yeah.
And had the Jews had friends in Europe, we wouldn't have lost just about all of our people.
Right. Right. And if America had opened their arms earlier to accept.
And in 1978, my father had to argue with the leaders of the Jewish community in Chicago, who all wanted them to stay home, close the shades, it'll pass. He reached out to the Christian community across the country. The Jewish community, not in Chicago, help us, stand with us, sign.
Yeah.
And that's what we have to do.
Yeah. That's right.
I want to mention, we're talking to help, yet if for those of you people who remember the CIA, the CEO of IBM, Mr. Watson, was selling registration cards to the German machinery to print out the Jewish names, addresses, where they are, where they live, the street and number, and to reach them at night and take them to the concentration camp, to the crematoria. And when I sit right now, I must give you just one little picture of it, which is in my ears. When the transport were coming in Auschwitz, on trucks, open trucks, and the men and women and children were crying, screaming. A line of trucks going to the crematoria, and at the end of the transport, a little Jeep with a big red cross on the roof and on the sides followed the transport and carrying the Cyclone B gas. It's in me. If the vision doesn't depart.
Well, we're so grateful that you're both here today. I have to go upstairs because I have church in 15 minutes, but it's been such an enrichment to my life to meet you and to be encouraged, to be hopeful from the one person who has every reason not to be hopeful. And Charlene, your project is an extraordinary one. We wish you all the best in telling this important story. On June 4th, we're going to be talking to Rabbi Beth Singer about her recent experience with a small group of Bay Area rabbis and Muslim leaders who traveled to Greece to meet with Syrian and Iraqi refugees who were forced to leave their home to flee war and persecution. So that's June 4th. And as always, you're welcome to join us upstairs for the liturgy. It's at 11 o'clock. We're a house of prayer for all people without exception. And we want to remind you, too, that we depend on your support. So if you can give us a little bit of a gift on your way out in the box, I'd appreciate it. And we're so very grateful to you, Ben and Charlene. Thank you very much.